Today, I want to share my experience after 1 week of using the new 14-inch M1 Pro MacBook Pro as my main computer. In this video, I'm going to go over why I chose this particular model, from the specs to the color, as well as talk about what the performance has been like so far. If you're thinking of buying one of these new MacBook Pros, but not sure which model to get, this video is for you. I've done a separate unboxing video that I will leave linked below, as well as my full review, which I'll have coming out very soon. So be sure to subscribe to not miss out on that. Okay, so to start, I chose the 14-inch M1 Pro MacBook Pro and got it in silver and upgraded the SSD to 1 terabyte. Now, this new model of MacBook Pro comes both in a 14-inch as well as a 16-inch version. Now, as someone who previously had the 15-inch, I have it here, the 15-inch MacBook Pro with Touch Bar, which was kind of in between the two sizes. Now, the reason why I previously chose the 15-inch model MacBook Pro was for the performance, not necessarily the larger display. And for its time, this computer definitely delivered in the performance area, but when it came to traveling, it was always just a little bit big to bring with me. And this is where the M1 Pro MacBook Pro I thought would be a good opportunity to step down to the smaller version and get the best of both worlds, being a computer that has the performance that I need in a form factor that is small enough and light enough to easily take with me on the go. So that's what led me to decide to get the 14-inch version rather than the larger 16-inch version. So I started with the base model, and that features the M1 Pro chip, which has an 8-core CPU, 14-core GPU, as well as 16 gigabytes of RAM and a 512 gigabyte SSD inside. Now, of those specifications, there is one thing that I upgraded, and that is the SSD. Now, on my previous MacBook Pro, I had a 512 gigabyte solid state drive, which was already upgraded from the 256 gigabytes. And over the years, this gradually filled up, and well, now it is barely enough for me to get by. So I decided to make the jump and upgrade to 1 terabyte. Now, Apple charges $200 to upgrade the storage, and I think this is actually a fairly reasonable price. Also considering that Apple uses incredibly fast storage for their SSDs, which I'll get more onto in a sec. So I spent the extra $200 to double the storage. And if you are buying one of these computers and planning to use it for many years to come, I do suggest making that one upgrade. I think of all the specs, the SSDs are the one thing that I would upgrade. The next choice was to pick between the color options. Now, I previously had space gray on my 15-inch MacBook Pro and knew that this time I wanted to switch back to silver. And there's two reasons for this. First, I really like the new matte black inlay that we have with the keyboard, and knew that the silver color would create really nice contrast between the darker keyboard as well as the lighter body. I think that pairs really well together. But the second reason is that after having used the space gray color on my older MacBook Pro for several years, I think just about 4.5 years now, I noticed that the paint by the palm rest started to wear and gradually fade a bit over time. And I'm not alone in this. This happens to every space gray MacBook Pro over time. For some it happens sooner, for some it happens later. But what this is this is the layer of paint gradually wearing, usually by the palm rest from the extended use of your palms touching this area of the computer. And this is quite unfortunate to see, as there is no way to fix this, and as you can see, will leave those permanent marks by the palm rests, and this is the space gray layer of paint gradually fading over time. Now, why is this less likely to happen on the silver model? Well, that's because the silver model, the natural color of aluminum is much more closer to this. So over time, I expect this effect to be far less apparent, maybe not even apparent at all on the silver model. So this is something to bear in mind if you're choosing between the two colors. So that gives you a look at my specific spec of the MacBook Pro and why I chose it. Now let's talk about my impressions so far and how the computer has been performing in my first week of daily use. First of all, I already mentioned this in my unboxing, but I love this more boxy, squared off design. It looks so sharp and I think is far more in line with Apple's current design language. Yes, the computer is a little bit thicker, but this also adds more room for better cooling and thus better performance, and also brings back functionality through all the additional ports that Apple was able to bring back. Now, as someone who creates videos every day, I am a huge fan of having the SD card slot. It is amazing to just take my SD card and instantly plug it into my computer to import my footage. Additionally, I'm also really happy to see MagSafe make a comeback. If you don't know, MagSafe is Apple's magnetic charging port, which will automatically detach when someone or yourself trips over the cable and will save your computer from being pulled off the table. On older models of MacBook Pros, MagSafe has definitely come in handy over the years for me. And then we do still get 3 versatile USB-C ports to hook up to your displays or any kind of docks or adapters that you may want, although you're probably going to need much less of those considering the new additional ports that we have brought back to these new models. Lastly, we also have an HDMI port, and this is useful if, say, you want to quickly hook up to a projector in a conference room or in your classroom at university without having to worry about bringing an adapter. And then opening up the MacBook Pro, we get this new black inlay for the keyboard that I briefly touched on earlier. And just to give you a better look at this, I really like this feature. It sets itself apart from the previous model and other versions of the MacBook Pros. And as I said, especially with this silver color, creates this really nice sharp contrast that I think looks especially great on the silver model. Looking at the top of the keyboard, we can see that Apple have removed the touch bar and brought back just regular hardware keys. Now, as someone who's used the touch bar for several years, while it has had its moments where it did come in useful, most of the time I found myself wishing for simple hardware keys that I can press without taking my eyes off the screen to quickly change core system functions like volume and brightness. So I'm glad to see these brought back on these new MacBook Pros. I'm also happy to see that Apple have kept Touch ID. So in the far right of the keyboard, you will find that same Touch ID sensor, allowing you to instantly log in to your Mac. Let's talk about the display. Now, the display on these new MacBook Pros is absolutely fantastic. We get these incredibly thin bezels going along either side of the display, as well as the top, and this makes the computer feel and look very modern, and also instantly makes older models of the MacBook Pro look that much older. But more importantly, having those really thin bezels also allows for a smaller computer body with a larger screen within. Now, this 14-inch MacBook Pro is only a little bit bigger than the 13-inch MacBook Pro from years before. So this allows for a bigger screen and a smaller body. With this new display, Apple also introduced 120 Hz, and this makes a very big difference. If you don't know, 120 Hz refresh rate will mean that all of your animations on screen, whether you are scrolling through web pages, switching between windows, are going to look incredibly smooth, and you'll notice this difference from day one. Don't get me wrong, a regular 60 Hz display does work well, but once you get used to that 120 Hz, it is very hard to go back. The display also gets plenty bright, has amazing contrast ratio, color reproduction, as well as accuracy. All things that are very important to me as someone who color grades video, as well as edits photos every day. And the new also on the top of the display, we will find the notch. Now, this is something that some people have mixed opinions of. I myself welcome it, and that is because it allows for more vertical screen space while not being obtrusive. If you think about it, your menu elements in your UI, rarely will they be in the top center of the display, so this is an area that is barely being used, so being able to stretch up the display, give more room, and just have that little cutout for your camera and your ambient sensors, for me it's not a problem at all. Of course, I would have liked to see Apple include Face ID inside this design, but perhaps they're saving this for the future model. Now let's get to what we've all been waiting for, and that is to see how does the base model 14-inch M1 Pro MacBook Pro perform. And this is from the perspective of someone who was previously used to a mid-range 15-inch model MacBook Pro. First impressions, this computer is lightning fast. Starting with the SSD, it is over 4 times faster than on my previous MacBook Pro, which for reference had a read and write speed of 1.5 gigabytes, whereas the 14-inch MacBook Pro comes in at 5.5 gigabytes. What this means is creating, copying, and pasting files is nearly instant. Booting up the computer is faster than ever, and waking up from sleep is so fast to a point where the display is always already on before I've even been able to lift the lid of the computer. Before I get into how the computer performs doing real work like editing photos and videos, let's talk about what's important, and that is gaming. No, I'm not a big gamer, but I do have a few games that I really enjoy playing, and one of which is Minecraft. I was shocked to see that Minecraft runs even better on my 14-inch MacBook Pro than it did on my 15-inch MacBook Pro, easily being able to run at a smooth 60 FPS with reasonable render distance, and when pushing the render distance really far, I could still get over 30 FPS. Now, by all means, this is not a gaming computer, but it is good to know that for casual gamers, this more than delivers. Now, let's get down to business. Editing videos in Final Cut Pro is a big part of my day-to-day and is probably the most graphic intense work task that I do. In short, Final Cut Pro has never run better. The app is so well optimized, it launches nearly instantly on these new MacBook Pros. Rendering is quick and seamless, and editing and working in a 4K timeline is truly effortless. Additionally, I've never gotten it to lag, even when color grading or adding multiple layers of elements to each clip. Overall, I would say Final Cut Pro is anywhere from 2 to 3 times faster on my 14-inch MacBook Pro compared to my previous 15-inch MacBook Pro. Now, this is especially impressive for 2 reasons. First, of course, this computer is smaller, being the 14-inch model, and secondly, this computer actually costs $600 less compared to my 15-inch MacBook Pro. And that doesn't even take into account inflation. Not to mention, the 14-inch MacBook Pro stays whisper quiet and barely gets warm. Now, for reference, I edit off an external Samsung T5 SSD, and while editing, I actually found the external hard drive to get warmer than my actual Mac itself. Now, all of this allows for a very comfortable work experience. And then when it comes to battery life, I found the M1 Pro MacBook Pro to perform very well. Now, it is also important to bear in mind if you are picking between the M1 Pro or the M1 Max version, that the M1 Pro version of both the 14 and especially the 16-inch versions will perform better in terms of battery life. Although not as powerful as the M1 Max chips, they are less power hungry. And for me, I was able to get just about 4 hours of heavy 4K editing, which is about twice as good as I would get on my previous 15-inch model, and I'd get anywhere from around 8 to 10 hours of mixed day-to-day use, from emailing to scripting, researching, watching YouTube videos, all of course at max brightness, and this again is twice as good, if not even better, compared to my 15-inch MacBook Pro. The speakers too are really great. Now, Apple's had excellent laptop speakers for many years now, but these computers take it even further. I would say that the built-in speakers on the 14-inch MacBook Pro really come close to that of the HomePod Mini and almost can replace a Bluetooth speaker. Over the past week, I found myself watching videos and even listening to music right on the computer. So that gives you a look at my first week experience with the 14-inch M1 MacBook Pro. Now, I have a lot more testing to do and many more thoughts to share for my full upcoming review, so be sure to stay tuned for that. For now though, what I can say is that I'm incredibly impressed with these new 14-inch MacBook Pros. I'm especially happy that for the first time, I don't have to choose between form factor or performance, as these 14-inch models allow me to get the best of both worlds. A computer that has the performance that I need, that I can also still easily throw in my backpack and take on the go. I hope this video can help you out with your buying decision. If you haven't seen it yet, I highly recommend watching my full unboxing video of the 14-inch MacBook Pro. Additionally, I've also done a review of the Logitech MX Master 3, and this is, in my opinion, the best all-time mouse to add to your Mac. I'll leave both of those videos linked on screen right now. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more content like this. Thanks for watching.